All right, good morning, everyone. This meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is hereby called to order. I do see a quorum present. This meeting is being conducted remotely pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021. Members of the public wishing to participate in the meeting must use their full name for Zoom access. If full names are not used, people will not be allowed to participate in the discussion. The town reserves the right to remove any member of the public from the meeting who doesn't use a full name or who acts inappropriately. I am Mary Longacre, Chair of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. As a preliminary matter, please permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. We did hear from Gary Beller that he would be joining us late. Sarah Boyce?
Here.
Peter Brace? Peter, you're on mute.
Here.
Thank you. I don't see Matt Fee yet. Ian Golding?
Yes, here.
Jen Carberg?
Here.
I don't see Fritz McClure. Did we hear from Fritz, Vince?
He sent an email a few days ago saying that he would not be able to attend.
Oh, okay.
Send it to both of us. So
Yeah.
I guess maybe if Peter could do the minutes.
Sorry, Peter, I didn't catch that in advance for you. I don't see Joanna Roach, and I'm Mary Longacre, so we do have a quorum of 5 present. And if we see others join us, we'll let you know. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Vince Murphy?
Here.
And I don't see any other town staff members and anticipated speakers on the agenda. Please respond in the affirmative. Trevor Johnson, representing the Arcadis project team.
Here.
Thank you. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment, time permitting. For this meeting, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is convening by a video conference via the Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note this meeting is being recorded and all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other people may be able to see you and take care not to share your device's screen. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Please silence all phones and devices. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. Before we turn to the first item on the agenda, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. The chair will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the list of members, inviting each by name to provide any comments, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Please remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking, and please speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. If you're not able to participate in the remote meeting, you may also submit comments to the Coastal Resilience Coordinator, Vince Murphy, to be read into the meeting record. His email is vmurphy@nantucket-ma.gov. And finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. I did see Gary Beller join us. Gary, can you say hello?
Hi.
Thank you, Gary. And that was the only member I see joining. So turning to the first item on the agenda, the Coastal Resilience Plan, the last page is acknowledgements. So today, the last shall be first. I don't want to forget that we have all worked very hard. There were hundreds of people involved in the creation of a Coastal Resilience Plan, but no one has done more work on this plan than Vince Murphy. He deserves tremendous credit for wrangling all of the constituencies to a successful completion of the CRP, and always doing so in a cheerful manner with unstinting accessibility. Thank you very much, Vince. Job well done. And thank you, of course, also to the committee members, to the town staff, to the project team, to our local organizations, to the members of the public, and other committee members for the town who participated by attending meetings or providing comments, and to our external speakers, R.P. Eddy, Dr. Chip Fletcher, Julia Neisel, Tom O'Shea, and consultants from Fuss & O'Neill for your participation in bringing the Coastal Resilience Plan to this point. We are deeply appreciative of your time and energy and hope to see continued engagement as we move into the implementation phases. This is not an ending. This is the beginning of Coastal Resilience for Nantucket. So again, thanks you, everybody. So our featured item on the agenda is the presentation and discussion of the Coastal Resilience Plan. So I'll introduce Trevor Johnson, who is representing the Arcadis project team, to give us an overview of the final CRP.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Yes, I would just second Mary's acknowledgement there. Thank you very much to the committee for all of the support that you provided over the course of this project. And I also do want to thank and acknowledge Vince for the amount of support that he's provided and effort he's put forth towards bringing this plan and being a great partner to our project team in helping to accomplish this year-long planning process. So definitely want to acknowledge that, and also thank you to everybody who submitted comments on the draft plan. We really received a significant number of comments and input, which greatly improved the document and greatly improved the report. I think hopefully those who submitted comments saw changes that reflect in one way or another their views and perspectives. It's wonderful to have that level of engagement and know that folks really are actually reading the plan and thinking about it critically and developing a perspective on how and in which ways we'll move forward towards implementation. So as Mary said, this plan is not the end. It's actually the beginning of a much longer implementation process. Plans are living documents. These are documents that will continue to evolve over time. So with that, I think we can turn to a brief overview. For today, I'm going to focus on the executive summary, which covers kind of the overall set of recommendations, and then I think having a conversation about next steps is really where I'd like to focus and answer any questions, of course, about the plan, but also just views on how we can sort of move forward with the implementation and kind of next steps related to the plan. So I'll pull it up, the document, and move through it. One, just a logistical thing that Mary pointed out to me via email is that just in case folks do want to view this on the screen, there's a couple of settings that might be helpful towards viewing this with the best experience possible. The first is to put it in 2-page view, which you'll see here on my screen. You also want to make sure that this is checked in Adobe to show the cover page in two-page view. If you don't do this, then the cover page shows up as a spread, as 2 pages, and it kind of messes with the ordering of the pages throughout the document. So you want to just make sure that this is checked here in order to have the best experience in viewing the document on your screen. I'll put this into full screen mode here as we go through. Again, want to focus on the executive summary and next steps today. I will say that there are typos and little things that still need to be corrected in this document, and those will of course all be corrected in the final document that we'll submit in a couple weeks here. Ideally, that will also include the letter from CRAC. So when we have that, we'll also include this placeholder for now, but we will make sure and be submitting another version of this document that addresses any and all minor corrections throughout the document. So the other thing I just want to say as by way of introduction is that there's another piece of the deliverable that we're working with Vince and the town staff on, which is to bring a lot of the mapping layers that are visualized here at an island-wide scale. Obviously these are, the scale of this study is such that it's hard to necessarily look at a lot of the maps in detail. And so much more useful will be a sort of a dynamic web-based mapping portal. So we'll be working with the town to over the next couple of weeks to make sure that we get the relevant GIS data loaded up to the town's website and symbolize it in a way that is consistent with the CRP and has information. So for those of you who may want to get a closer look at some of the hazard and risk layers that have been developed through the CRP, those data will be available via the town's website. I guess the final thing, just on the number of comments we received, there's the kind of mostly fell into a bucket of needing clarification. And I think what was really helpful for our project team was being able to determine where we weren't describing things, effectively, or where additional clarity was required. And one example of that, I think, is the question around sort of the historic and natural character of the island. It was clear from some of the comments that we hadn't communicated well how important that was as one of the criteria we brought to the table. So hopefully it comes through in some of the additional language that we've added in the report, which is intended to really convey that pretty much every recommendation has been generated out of a acknowledgement and appreciation for the deep commitment to historic preservation and ecological restoration, and just sort of natural and built heritage of the island. And I think you'll see that in the recommendations, which do focus on nature-based solutions and do are calibrated to the specific, I guess, physical and built attributes that are cherished by Nantucket. The downtown neighborhood flood risk barrier being one example where there are a lot of different ways that concept could be developed. And the way that we've tried to develop that recommendation, which again is still a concept that will be refined, is to think about it as something that can be nested within the existing built character, trying to disrupt as little as possible about the what is cherished about the downtown area of Nantucket. Okay, so with that, I'll start to walk through the executive summary here, and we can dive into any of the specific recommendations across the island if there are questions about those. But I want to focus just on the high-level summary. Obviously, for those of you, I think most people on the call today have been involved, but the CRP has been over a year-long process. It has involved a lot of technical and other types of analysis, a significant amount of community engagement, as Mary acknowledged at the outset. I will say that this is among the most civically engaged communities that I've worked in my career. It is unfortunate that this planning effort took place during the COVID-19 pandemic for many reasons, but one of those reasons is that we didn't get a chance to come out and meet face to face. I do hope that we'll have a chance to do that in the future. But just from participation in public meetings, well over 100 attendees at both of our open houses, participation in crack meetings, just overall engagement and discourse around the planning effort. There's always more we can do to engage more people, and certainly we look forward to continuing to do that as we move forward with this plan. But I will say that it's been very impressive to see the Nantucket community engage around this effort, and I feel like this is a very strong foundation from which to grow and continue this conversation around implementation of the CRP. I think we kicked this study off in late October with a meeting to the crack in 2020, and here we are just after that point a year later, and hopefully everybody feels like a lot has happened in that time and that a lot of work has happened. I think having the CRP together is a great foundation for the community, particularly with the recommendations that we've set forth that for implementation over the next 10 to 15 years. And I think that's something to stress about. The approach that has been taken here is that the CRP is a document that's going to need to be refreshed over time based on a lot of things that will evolve. Our understanding of climate science, our evaluation of projected sea level rise, the community's perspective on climate change and sea level rise, our monitoring and observations about what happens over the next 10 years. So when we come back, when the town comes back, the community comes back to update this plan in a decade or so, we'll have learned a lot in the meantime, but hopefully we'll also see implementation of many of the 40 recommendations that I'll go through in a moment. So I think I covered most of this. I do want to just point out on this set of pages, we spoke about the community engagement. There is also the supplementary report I think, to answer a question that I believe Ian Golding had last time we met, this is the CRP, this document that I'm showing on the screen here is certainly the go-to resource. This is the document that folks should be reading if they want to understand what the plan is for coastal resilience on Nantucket. However, there is another 100-page or so document that is a supplement to this that goes into a bit more detail on the risk analysis and on the existing conditions kind of evaluation and mapping that was done at the project midpoint. So that's been updated to reflect our updated numbers around the risk analysis, but this is the CRP, this document here is one that we hope that folks will look at and read, and then if they have follow-up questions, go to the supplementary report that's linked a few times throughout this document and also posted on the town's website. We did, for those of you who haven't been involved in this process along the way, we've looked at a broad toolkit of potential solutions and undertaken a deep evaluation of risk across the hazards of tidal flooding, coastal flooding, and coastal erosion. And we have kind of these categories of approaches from protection, which is kind of building to protect critical assets and the built environment from coastal hazards, adapting to live with the sea. I would say most of the sort of solutions that we've developed fall into the adapt category. Really kind of that living with water approach, acknowledging that these risks are present and that we do need to adapt our lifestyle and our built environment in order to accommodate those risks. And then relocation, and this is the one that's probably the thorniest, but one that is a reality for Nantucket and has already been a reality for the community in the past and will continue to be. And that's something that really requires a lot of ongoing community engagement and conversations. And one of the recommendations, as we'll talk about in a second, is related to beginning those conversations for areas of the island that are at extreme risk today, and that risk will only grow in the future. So thinking about what does it mean to relocate? It means a lot of different things from physically moving structures to buyouts to land swaps to setbacks, and there's quite a bit of information in the CRP that should hopefully provide guidance as to how we move forward with the relocation approach. So the overall recommendations fall into two main kind of categories. The first is island-wide strategies. These island-wide strategies comprise governance and policy approaches. They speak to kind of a toolkit of island-wide erosion mitigation and sediment management approaches, and to regulatory changes that can both increase resilience, but also may be necessary to help implement some of the recommendations from the plan as well. And these island-wide approaches, these are approaches that apply throughout the county. So across Nantucket, on Tuckernuck, on Muskeget, these are recommendations that will be further, their application will be further informed by ongoing studies, such as a sediment transport and sourcing study, further evaluation of kind of relocation and retreat programs. So these are kind of setting up a broad-based approach that the community can use to really think about how these apply over the next 10 years based on ongoing conversations with the community and subsequent, technical evaluations and planning that may happen related to coastal resilience or not. Thinking about examples like the Matticat Culvert study, that's a study that is a sort of a technical deep dive into a set of physical conditions and helps informs the strategy. So those types of studies will continue to happen on Nantucket and can help inform the application of island-wide strategies. Then the second kind of category of strategies are focus area strategies. So we've divided the island into a number of focus areas, including Matticat, downtown, the South Shore, Sconset, and then Nantucket Harbor and Co2. And these are areas that have significant risk today and in the future, as everyone knows. These are areas where we have a concentration of built and natural assets and critical infrastructure in most cases. And so these are places where we've developed much more, I guess, focused and strategic opportunities that look at investments in infrastructure and other types of planning investments and planning studies that are necessary to advance resilience in each of these areas. And each of these areas in the plan has a standalone section. So you'll see that there is a Mattakit focus area section. We've tried to develop, while trying to keep this document somewhat concise, we've tried to develop these focus area strategy sections to stand alone a little bit, so that if you're only interested in Mattakit, if you only want to know what the strategy is for downtown, you can go to that section and kind of sort of understand what the strategy is and how it fits within the island-wide framework. Certainly, we're not able to get every piece of information into those focus group sections, but we do want to make this this plan digestible in chunks and bits as much as we can. So this spread, which is in the executive summary and is also in section 5 of the report, is the kind of overall summary of recommendations. I won't go into all of these at this time. I'm happy to answer questions. There are 40 projects. They do span, from additional study, ongoing engagement, nature-based solutions like dune restoration, physical strategies like elevating roadways and replacing existing culverts with elevated bridges, to the downtown neighborhood flood barrier, which is a strategy that looks at protecting to a certain elevation the downtown kind of core of Nantucket, which is paired with an additional strategies related to Steamboat Wharf, which is an extremely critical facility to the island. We have, as I mentioned before, really taken to heart the value and the importance of the ecological, natural, and built heritage of Nantucket throughout these recommendations. We have not proposed a significant protectionist approach across the island. Many of the strategies are really intended to mitigate and adapt and live with erosion, live with the sea, but not necessarily alter significantly natural processes, except where there's a really strong case to do so, such as where we have critical infrastructure such as the Surfside wastewater treatment facility, the airport, and in downtown. Where we feel, based on conversations with the community and our risk analysis, there's a justification for taking a little bit more measures that it will protect these important facilities towards life safety and quality of life on Nantucket. I think just on the island-wide study strategies, if it wasn't clear in what I said earlier, I think a lot of these are related to ongoing engagement and ongoing conversations. All strategies will require that, but many of the sort of island-wide strategies are things that can begin really immediately with ongoing conversations at the committee, and commission and board level. So things like updates to the zoning bylaw, updates to the wetland ordinance. Many of the programs like the Strategic Retreat and Relocation Program, updates to locally adopted, best available flood hazard data. These are things that CRAC, the Planning Board, Conservation Commission, Select Board, and other bodies can take up and really continue this conversation as an immediate next step. And as we'll talk about at the very end here, that is the recommended next step for a lot of these projects. Around implementation, so we have developed a kind of phasing chart that maps out a recommended sequence of implementation. I will say, this is a recommendation, right? This is not a hard and fast must be followed sequencing of projects, right? This is a set of estimations based on what we know about how long projects may take, what funding sources are currently available, and a prioritization based on kind of the urgency of the risk that they address. And so that's this is a kind of a starting point for the community to begin to think about how we can unpack 40 projects and make sure that we have the capacity to start to deliver on these projects over time. It is a lot. Some of these are quick and straightforward to implement through conversations at the committee level. Others are much bigger projects that are going to take a long time. They need to be scoped. They need to be funded. There's going to be a lot of work that has to happen. And so that's what we've tried to do here. But again, recommendations, this is a recommendation and an estimate, not a not a hard and fast sort of plan that needs to be followed. And we do want to make clear that if there are opportunities that arise to implement something sooner than is included on this phasing chart, those opportunities should absolutely be taken, because we can't wait, and we need to be strategic as well as opportunistic in how we advance resilience on Nantucket. And I will say, the other thing I'd say is it is not possible it's not possible to protect everything, which is why we do have these particular projects outlined as the high priority projects. We do recommend all of these projects be implemented over the next 10 to 15 years, but the prioritization is also meant to help the community assess how to best allocate resources. So priority 1 projects are projects that have a significant benefits in terms of their risk reduction. They have dependencies, which means that other projects will depend upon them. Things like the sediment budget and sediment transport study. There's a lot of work that can begin to happen once those studies are done. So things like that are high priority to begin as soon as possible. Then there are other studies that either their risk reduction benefit is a little bit lower, or the risk isn't as urgent, or there's sort of less dependencies related to them that are lower priority. It doesn't mean that these shouldn't get done. They should get done. It just means that they're not as high priority for kind of near term immediate action. And now finally to the costs and the benefits. I know there's likely to be a number of questions about these. So the total collective estimated cost of the projects is between 830 and $900 million over the next 10 to 15 plus years. That includes 11 million in expected annual operations and maintenance costs. It is very, very important, hard to overstate the importance of viewing these as planning level estimates. These are not the estimates as to what these projects will actually cost. At this stage of design, we're still in a very conceptual space. It is best practice to include, industry best practice to include a significant contingency related to these projects at this level of design, because there's a lot we don't know, right? We don't know what's below the surface. We haven't done site surveys. We haven't been able to do geotechnical investigations of subsurface conditions. These investigations will help refine costs at the next level of design for structural and nature-based projects. But what we do know at this stage is kind of rough order of magnitude that helps us understand and kind of get our hands around the level of expected investment. And it is substantial. It's very substantial. But as you'll see, some of these projects also have substantial benefit. And so it is a lot of money to think about, almost $1 billion. But we also have a significant amount of risk on Nantucket that needs to be addressed over time. The other thing I would point out is that this is not paying for this is not all on Nantucket necessarily. I think a lot of this is likely to come out of local capital funding. But there are other sources of funding. There are private funders on Nantucket that may be able to assist the town and the community, of course, with attentions to equity and other considerations. But also at the federal and state level, I think every year we see new opportunities arising around around funding for coastal resilience and adaptation. And we expect that those funding programs are only going to become more abundant over time. And so the state of Massachusetts has a number of programs that can assist with follow-on planning and design for many of these projects. And at the federal level, there is significant funding available for further study, but also and design, but also implementation of projects. And these programs fund projects up to, in some cases, $50 million. So there's significant funding that is available. And we've spoken to Vince and we've spoken to this committee before about how we can be of assistance in securing and helping advance applications for these grant applications. And I think CRAC has a significant role to play in that as well. They are competitive, very competitive, and so there's no assurances as to the ability to access those funds. But I do want to make clear that there are opportunities available outside of the town's limited financial resources to help address this need. And then on the benefit side, we've been able to quantify about $460 million in quantified benefits for these projects. This is an underestimation of the benefits, very much so. In many cases, we don't have the data, or really just the methodologies haven't been developed fully to fully quantify benefits. And I'm talking about things like the value of ecological restoration, the value of open space, the value of community capacity building. These are sort of, I won't say intangibles, but difficult to put dollar figures around. And so when we say that there's $460 million in quantified benefits, we're also saying that that's just a specific subset of benefits that we're able to put a dollar figure attached to. And some of these projects where we have a density of development, density of buildings, like the downtown neighborhood flood risk barrier, which is projected to cost between $150 and $170 million. But helps the community avoid $320 million in losses through 2070. So with that type of project, obviously we see a significant amount of benefit because of the density of homes and businesses and other structures located in downtown Nantucket. In other areas where we don't have the same density, it's a little bit harder to communicate cost effectiveness through a quantification of avoided losses to buildings alone. Places like Matticat, this is an important area of Nantucket. It has a lot of ecological value. People live there. People spend their lives there, and so it's important to think about how we can adapt and make Matticat more resilient. But it might just be hard to say that the dollars of benefits are always going to meet the dollars of protection, and that's a conversation that the community will continue to have about how we talk about benefits and make sound decisions about expenditures around resilience projects. And just to stress again that the costs are planning level and should be used for planning purposes only. The next stages for any structural project, the next stages of feasibility and preliminary feasibility analysis and preliminary design will really help clarify some of the costs that might be anticipated for specific projects. And then next steps, I think I'll quit talking in a couple minutes, but I did want to just highlight a couple of things. One I thought was a great suggestion from the CRAC meetings we had in September and October, which was how do we distill this plan down into a set of discrete actions that different audiences can take first. And I think for CRAC, obviously you'll be a citizen kind of group, a leadership group in how this plan moves forward and is implemented. One of the roles that is most important is one, continuing the conversation, but secondly, the funding piece. And CRAC members have the ability to help develop and secure grant funding, whether it's from the state, the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs, which has the MVP Action Grant Program, Coastal Zone Management, which has a Coastal Resilience Grant Program, and numerous other, state funding programs, and then also, federal programs as well. So, that's a conversation that we can continue to have as we move forward with this implementation process. And then for everybody else, there's a lot that folks can do. For the everyday resident, business owner, and property owner on Nantucket, we've developed, this matrix here that kind of distills down the plan into what you need to know and what you can do next. For most Nantucketers, the thing that really I would drive home as folks needing to know is that everybody has a role to play in the implementation of this plan, where it's not possible to protect everything through public investment, and private investment is going to be necessary, and it is everybody's responsibility to know their risk and to take steps to mitigate that. If each person does their part, the overall resilience of the island, is going to be increased, and the overall risk of the island is going to be reduced. And there are a number of very easy things that can be done, as described in the property owner guidance in section 7 of this report, that private property owners can do, immediately, this weekend, next week, to begin to advance resilience. And so that's the main thing I'd want to take home, and I want to leave folks with in terms of how they can participate. And I think for everybody, the additional step would be, to just join the conversation. The Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee obviously meets very regularly, and is really a forum for ongoing conversations about coastal resilience and the implementation of the CRP. So folks joining these conversations and also having conversations with their friends, family, and neighbors about these topics. It really is true that the more knowledge that is shared around the island, the more likely people are to take action, the more likely people are to engage civically in town meeting and through other venues to help advance this plan. So with that, I think I'll stop there and open it up to questions and discussion.
Thank you very much, Trevor. Do we have committee members with questions or comments? I do have a question for you, Trevor. Several of the projects that are recommended are referred to as pilot projects, and it isn't clear to me what makes a project a pilot project as opposed to a regular project, and why a location would be selected for a pilot rather than a regular project. Can you elaborate on the concept of pilot projects?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. The pilot project in Matticat and at Tom Nevers, I think we're attaching the word pilot there in that they're learning opportunities. One of the things we heard from residents in Matticat is that there's a real interest in experimenting with different ways of advancing erosion mitigation in that portion of the island. And so the project is called Dune Restoration, but I think it's an opportunity to pilot different types of dune restoration approaches in that location. And then for Tom Nevers, the strategy is called a pilot there, just because our recommendation is hopefully clear that we think that needs to move forward prior to advancement of any capital improvements to Tom Nevers Park. And the pilot is meant to test the performance of that project in terms of mitigating erosion prior to making millions of dollars of investment in Tom Nevers Park, which we think we need to understand how well those erosion mitigation approaches will perform before we make public investment. And if it turns out that we're not seeing the performance that we'd like to see, then it may be prudent and appropriate to think about an alternative location for those investments. So I think those are the two areas where we see attached the word pilot to it, but in some ways it's not different from other dune restoration projects that we've identified through the plan.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Yes, Ian. Ian, you're muted.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry. And thank you, Trevor, for all your work on this throughout the months. And it's a pretty impressive document, and it's certainly going to be a great help for us as a community. I think there's no question it's going to help us focus on it. And I know you said that you couldn't identify the exact volumes, which is absolutely understandable. But for cost estimates, have I missed the pages that the actual cost estimates are on?
Yeah, so the cost estimates are located in a couple places. First, they're located with the strategy recommendation summary in each section, and I can scroll to a particular area. Excuse the quick scroll here, but I'll show you just where the cost estimates are housed in the sections. So each section, if you go through, for example, this is downtown, has this recommended project summary. And in each of the project summaries, you'll see that there's an estimated cost line that has, here we've broken it between capital costs, the capital costs with contingencies, and then the annual operations and maintenance. So that's the first place that the costs are located. And then they're also located in the implementation roadmap in section 8, which has a sort of a table with every project and additional implementation guidance for each project.
Thank you. I was, until this morning when it was finally explained to me, I was having difficulty with the double pages, which was something of an impediment. So thank you very much.
Gary?
Thank you, Mary, for letting me have my views, although I might sound like a broken record. I think the most difficult decisions that the town will have to make is the selection of priorities going forward. And to me, it's really clear. What I would love to have said to Trevor, Trevor, I want to give you the same choice that Sophie had in that famous movie, which of your children do you want to save and which do you want to put on the train? And I know it's very difficult to say, if you had to choose one priority, what would it be? But to me, as I said at our last meeting, it's really clear. And I think that I get troubled every time I hear what sounds to me like confusion among even the town leaders. Because to me, it's very clear. Number one priority is protecting our infrastructure. It ain't protecting the Sconset homeowners, and it ain't protecting the Hulbert Avenue people. It's our infrastructure. And I think the more we emphasize that, the more the people on the island of Nantucket will understand what their priorities have to be. And I don't think that, unfortunately, you have stressed that enough. You stressed it a little bit. But to me, if we don't have the infrastructure protected, if we don't have water systems protected, if we don't have transportation and the roads, if Easy Street is no longer passable, who cares what's going on at Sconset? Who cares about the bluff? The folks last night didn't even think about the infrastructure. They think that's a high priority. To me, the high priority is our infrastructure. And that's what we need to focus on. And I'm sorry that we don't have more of a focus in the report on how important fixing our infrastructure is. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. That's certainly something that we can add to our letter that introduces the report. I did see throughout the report several bits of language that I wanted to pull to the front. And Gary, I think that's the kind of opportunity that we have to put the stress where we think it should be. Vince?
Thank you. When public comment comes around, I've had an email question from a member of the public when you're ready, Mary. There's no rush.
Thanks. Matt Fee just joined us as well, so I just want to note that for the records at 10:45. Another question from Commissioner?
Mary, do you mind if I respond to Gary quickly?
Oh, please go ahead, Trevor.
Gary, I think that, I mean, I appreciate that comment very much. And I think we're in agreement. That is an example of the use of the prioritization in the implementation phasing diagram. You know, you'll see if you look at the projects in priority 1, those are the projects that are designed to protect infrastructure, you know, the downtown neighborhood flood risk barrier, the Surfside wastewater treatment plant, the airport, you know, those are very much, those projects are priority number 1 because of the risk reduction benefit, you know, not just to specific facilities, but to the services that they offer to the community. So your point is well taken. You know, I agree with you, but I do just want to highlight that those projects are those projects that benefit infrastructure are high priority in the plan. And maybe that's something that we can, you know, I think the crack letter is a great opportunity to further kind of drive that point home.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. Sarah?
Yeah, thank you, Mary. Thank you, Trevor. And I just want to, I wasn't planning on making a comment, but just based on what Gary was just saying, I think both in the letter that Craig puts on before at the, you know, the beginning of the plan, but also when we, in our future meetings, when we start talking about implementation, how we can assist with implementation, maybe that's, you know, a further role of the committee is ensuring that equitability, you know, we do serve the entire island. And so even though there's different interest groups for different neighborhoods and for specific reasons, the plan is broken into solutions in different neighborhoods. I think it's our job partially in the discussion and interpretation to emphasize that we do serve the entirety of the island. And I think, you know, exactly to what Gary was saying, kind of keep pushing that forward, because I think it is, you know, we've talked in this group at various stages about how equitable we want this process to be. We want to serve the entirety of the community. And so I, especially coming from Gary, who lives in a very vulnerable area, recognizing that the infrastructure being more important than, you know, where anyone's individual house is, I think is a really a good point, and how I feel like we could kind of keep our voices in that forefront aspect. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Other comments, Ian?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And through you to Gary, I totally take your point, Gary, believe you me. But yesterday afternoon's webinar, I think it was called, between the Select Board and Concom was strictly focused on SBPF. So there was no chance for any of those issues to be addressed, I think, yesterday. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Other comments? One of the things that I had a little bit of difficulty with, and I think that I did come to understand it through reading the whole document. Trevor, if you can put up page 105. I had difficulty with the language, but I think in the context of that particular page, you might want to use the go to page because 105 is a lot of scrolling. That was a retreat context. And yeah, so planning for strategic retreat and relocation. So that second column of text, it seemed like you were saying both that something was recommended and wasn't recommended. And I think what I came to understand was that you're making the point that downtown is at higher risk, and that justifies more intensive effort. But you're doing compare and contrast of a lot of different things there. Non-structural approaches and structural approaches, priority areas and not priority areas. But is it, and I think your comments today said the same thing, you're saying that the downtown area is an area where more intensive and expensive work is justified because of the priority of the area, because of the historic status, because of the density of buildings and the value of what's there. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, yeah, that's exactly right. There's a there's a strong case to be made for significant investment in that area, because that this is where Nantucket is centered, right? We can't easily move the downtown. It may be necessary in the very, very long term, as discussed through the long-term adaptation pathways, to think about relocating some of those uses. But as a near-term strategy, there is a cost-effective solution that we could continue to progress that isn't the same as other areas of the island.
Thank you.
And I think if this second column is confusing on that point, we'll take another look just to make sure that point is coming across as as clearly as possible.
And I had another question about downtown. As I was looking at the various components that could be proposed to protect downtown, one of the things that struck me was they'll probably be built in phases. This piece over here, that piece over there. And I wondered if protecting in that sort of piecemeal fashion, that area would cause negative effects on the areas that were not protected first. Can you speak to what happens when you start implementing protection? What happens to adjacent areas, and what do we need to be thinking about in that context?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. The phasing is absolutely something that I think will be something that needs to be really looked at through the next phase of investigation. Would be looking at what are the different potential compartments that could be built that would be independently effective, right? You can't build a piece that's just going to have floodwaters flanking it, right? That would not be effective. So there needs to be an analysis done to look at, which sections can be built as kind of standalone compartments. It's, I think there is the question of, often we get the question of, if you build one piece, is it going to exacerbate flooding elsewhere? It's something that would need to be looked at through that, follow-on study. In most cases, in a coastal environment, you don't see significant, additional volume of water getting displaced, because you have, the entire Atlantic Ocean, Nantucket, Sound and harbor kind of, providing the backup, additional volumetric space for water. But it can affect velocities and things like that, and wave deflection. So, you'd have to study that as part of the design process to make sure that anything you're doing is kind of having this do no harm approach, right? The same goes with the drainage, right? We may be able to solve drainage problems, but at a minimum, it's a do no harm approach. We don't want to exacerbate or make interior stormwater drainage worse. And those are things that any engineer or designer who's going into this process is going to have to look at those in a really intensive way as part of the design process.
Thank you. Jen, question?
Thank you, Mary. Not a question, just a comment, kind of a follow-up on what your question was. And I think thinking about the downtown and the protection that's going to have to go in place, and it potentially happening piecemeal, that we're going to want to think about or encourage the communication between different property owners and different projects, that what's done on one space, when the next one comes into play, making sure that they tie up and provide a similar level of protection. One property owner doesn't necessarily undermine what's going in on another space, so that they work together to provide this at least the same level of protection. And I think that kind of conversation works for downtown, but also other places around the island where protection is going in.
Thank you, Jen. Do we have members of the public who have questions or comments at this time? And Trevor, could you take the screen share down so I can see everyone? You can use the raise hand feature to let us know if you have a question or comment. And if you're not able to use that, you can send a message through the chat to me or to Vince, just to let us know that you do want to speak. But just a reminder, we are not equipped to take comments through the chat. Vince, you did have a comment coming through?
Thank you, Mary. I had a comment that arrived at 10:43 from Deanne Atherton by email. It was around about the time that we were discussing pilot projects in Madaket. So I think it might relate to that. The text, the email reads, there is some confusion about what dune restoration means, and looking for an explanation on that, I would think.
Trevor?
Sure. I guess I'm not sure whose confusion. So dune restoration is defined in section 6 of the section 5 of the report. No, excuse me, section 6, the island-wide strategies, where we describe kind of island-wide erosion management approaches. I think, you know, there's natural dune restoration, which includes sand and vegetation and other types of natural features. And then there's, you know, a more reinforced dune restoration, which, you know, some you know, in under state definition might be considered harder armoring. Those are solutions that have only been proposed in specific locations where we have critical infrastructure. So you can turn to section 6 of the report, where the definitions of dune restoration are being that we're using for the CRP are described.
Thank you, Trevor. Howard Dickler, you have your hand up. You unmute.
Yes, thank you, Mary. And I want to say thank you to all the committee for all your hard work. We're way ahead of other committees, other towns, other jurisdictions, and that's very gratifying. And I know it's because of all of your hard work. I want to say I very much agree with Mr. Beller. I think the key word for me is critical infrastructure, by which I mean without which the island could not survive. So survivability would be, in my mind, the criteria for a first priority. One thing I found a little missing from the report in among the 40 solutions was the concept of sustainability. It seems to me that some projects are sustainable and other projects are not, and somehow that needs to be factored into the assessment of whether they can be afforded. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Howard. Do we have other members of the public with questions or comments? Anything further from committee members? Yes, Ian?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Trevor, I noticed that, well, lead me through what would happen in the sort of 2050, 2070 scenario when with the ferry still, you know, the dock within the floodgate would mean that the ferry couldn't run for a number of days every year. Was there any consideration for putting it outside of that downtown area? Because that seemed, there was just, all I could see was one single reference to that. And taking up the point about, you know, critical infrastructure, I would say that has to be in the top tier of the list.
Trevor?
Yes, and in fact, it is the top of the list in terms of, you know, when we look at critical infrastructure in the specific way, as Mr. Dickler mentioned, you know, pertaining to life safety, you know, Steamboat Wharf is you know, top of the list in terms of prioritization. You know, that long-term adaptation scenario for downtown, you know, the presumption is that, you know, that gate would close during a significant storm event. So when we have a very major flood that's forecast, it's not likely that the ferry would be running under those conditions anyway. But I think also, to your point, yes, you know, that long-term adaptation could very much contemplate a relocation of the ferry terminal even to the outside of that that barrier, right? You know, if you look at the graphic, there is actually an indication that you could put the ferry terminal on the exterior elevated and provide kind of the trucking and other access. We don't know what the world's going to look like in 2070. It may be very different than today, which is the challenge of long-term planning. But assuming we still use trucks to get things around at that point, you could have a roadway on the barrier. So there's a lot of different things that could be played out. The hazard mitigation plan for Nantucket does speak to trying to identify a redundant location for ferry landing if Steamboat Wharf were to go out of service. I think that's a recommendation that the town can and should continue to look at. None of this precludes those options. I think our sense was that Nantucket Harbor is a sheltered harbor. It is a place where we have the kind of I guess the agglomeration of things that help Steamboat Wharf be where it is and support its function and the function of the island overall. And so that's a location where it can continue to be, since it's already there, as long as we adapt it to address the long-term risks. So hopefully that answers your question. I guess the upshot is that it doesn't, nothing about the long-term scenario precludes relocating Steamboat Wharf in the future. It could be stay where it is. It could go on the exterior of the barrier. It could go to a different part of the island. It just needs to, if it goes to a different part of the island, by 2070, there's going to be a lot of, there are many areas that are going to be at risk, right? So identifying another location that's lower risk than the harbor that has a protective investment in it might be challenging.
Thank you, Trevor. So Trevor, did you have something in mind that you wanted to talk about for next steps?
No, I mean, not necessarily. I think in terms of immediate next steps, I'd be curious, actually the cracks opinion on what you all think would be the prudent next steps in terms of engagement and moving forward. And we've talked a little bit about supporting funding applications for the town. So there is a next step related to how, which programs we pursue and for which projects that Vince and I have talked a little bit about, but I think that's an ongoing conversation that he's having and will continue to have with this committee.
Okay, so what I envision as our immediate, like next week, next steps, we need to write and accept a letter to go to be inserted into the Coastal Resilience Plan. We will probably need to write some sort of an introduction or message to the select board as we send the plan to them for them to formally accept and adopt. I imagine that we will address the replacement of our existing sea level rise recommendation with the recommendation from the Coastal Resilience Plan. At the point where the select board accepts or adopts it, then it becomes official. And what I see us doing is communicating with many of the stakeholders that have been involved in the development to let them know that the plan is here, that it is available to them, and to ask, what do they need in terms of our support to be able to implement either directly the recommendations of the plan or indirectly just the mindset around the plan. Happy to hear from other people who have ideas about those steps. Ian?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as really became sort of almost self-evident at the joint meeting between the Select Board and Concom yesterday evening, was the subject of sand and the enormous volumes of sand, and to what extent will they be necessary, especially when balancing it against the carbon offset going forward. But I think this is something that maybe Arcadis would be able to help us with, is actually laying out a blueprint about how to go through a federal application, or even suggest investing in a source off island. I mean, it is the sort of one of the big elephants in the room, I would say. So I don't know how to go about that, but we all seem to be sort of trying to dodge it while I'm talking about what we're going to need to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. And Vince, do you have some more comments about next steps?
Some, you pretty much covered them all. I think one of the only things I have to say about next steps, to add to what either Mary or Trevor said, is that I think when it comes to the select board, Trevor would probably be willing to attend, if I'm not speaking out of turn. I mean, we spoke about this last week, to give a brief presentation and overview of the CRP, so that the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee could keep that in mind as well, that Arcadis could give a brief presentation at that time. And Ian is right on sand. I getting more and more worried. I've said here before that we're going to be able to get some. I have no idea if we're going to get enough. And then studying that's going to be something important. I don't know if that's going to be something that Arcadis can address at the moment, or under some kind of retaining contract that we've not properly discussed yet, or if it would have to be another type of contract, but it will be something that would come under the sediment budget study, which is one of the recommendations. And that's one of the ones that I'm eager to get off the ground, and hopefully the committee could help me with that one, please.
Thank you, Vince. Gary?
So in talking about the next steps, and in talking about things like sand, and in talking about opportunities to compete with other jurisdictions for priority in federal or state funding, it seems to me that one of our priorities clearly ought to be to get an early start in putting in applications where funding may be available, so that we can get a lead on other jurisdictions. Now, part of the decisions that we will have to make, to go back to my earlier comments, is that when we are seeking funding grants, are we seeking it for sand, which is fine, and I think that's a very important subject, as Ann mentioned, but the question is, for which projects do we focus on when we file the application? We just can't say, I assume. You have to be somewhat specific about the risks that are evident, which require funding from these federal or state sources. And so we're going to need to establish priorities as to what the applications point to. But the most important point to me is we should early on start seeking the funding, and then we'll have to make the difficult decision as to how we describe or what project we specifically focus on as we make those federal and state applications. Thanks.
Thank you, Gary. Other questions or comments from committee members? The other thing I wanted to say is that many of us are here as representatives of other organizations. I would encourage you to go back to your organization with the final CRP, introduce it to the organization, and collect any feedback that we have directly from those groups, particularly the town committees. We want to make sure that that this is widely known, that the Coastal Resilience Plan is island-wide. It affects just about everything. So we'll begin at home and go from there. All right, any further questions or comments from members of the public on this topic? And if there are none, we will go ahead to the next item on the agenda. Again, Trevor, thank you very much. I think we will look forward to seeing you one more time with the select board, but I'm not sure that we'll have any other opportunities. So have a wonderful winter if we don't hear from you soon.
Big thanks to Trevor.
Yes, thank you
Thank
all.
you, Trevor.
Thank you. I have a feeling our paths will cross again, hopefully sooner rather than later. So I don't think I'll be a stranger. And feel free, anybody, it should go without saying, but feel free to reach out to me if there are questions, either through Vince or directly. We want to be a partner to the committee moving forward. We know this is a lot, and these are tricky issues. So we do want to continue to support you and the community throughout this process as much as we can.
Thank you, Trevor. And that raises a question that I had. You had established an email address for direct communication to Arcadis. At what point does that email address go away?
There's no sunset. We haven't really discussed, I guess, it could stay active for as long as we'd like it to. We could send out, we could put in a way message on it that in case anybody does reach out to it, it directs them to Vince or someone else. Those emails come to me and members of our team. So in the short term, it doesn't have to, it's not going to go away tomorrow or anything. So I can speak with Vince about, the right way or the best way to kind of, bring that email address to a close.
I think redirecting to Vince is a good idea, but certainly he can tell you what he wants us to do.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers, Trevor.
Okay, so the next item on our agenda is updates on other related and concurrent coastal resilience projects. I know Vince has some updates for us. You go ahead, Vince.
So the first one on the agenda is Baxter Road. I might defer on that one. Ian may have more to say on that than me because he participated, even though I watched all last night's committee meeting. He was an active participant, and I will leave that to Ian if he wishes.
Ian, anything you want to relay from that?
Well, it was very civil, but I don't think there's been any meeting of the minds regarding a compromise from, this is my personal opinion, but so we'll see what the next step will be on that. Thank you, Vince. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Vince, back to you.
Thanks. I can just give a quick update on beg your pardon, Sheep Pond Road. So I've had little to report there for quite a while now. I do have something to report. Sheep Pond Road residents are going to be meeting with town and NCF staff in the not too distant future to discuss a route for the new road that will take through NCF property. Basically, this will be a meeting just to understand the routing more than anything else. And then after that, it'll come down to town admin to understand what deal may have to be done over acquiring that route. So this is something that's probably going to take place in the next few weeks. I have no idea of a real timeline other than that it's imminent.
Thank you, Vince. All right, so then we also have Jen, if there's anything that you wanted to relay on the CO2 work that you're doing with the trustees and the Conservation Foundation.
Sure, Mary, thank you. The trustees and NCF had a meeting with our consultants, I think 2 weeks ago, and they gave us their draft recommendations for the properties. As a reminder, we're working together to look at 4 areas of our kind of highest concern out on Coscata CO2. And that's the Galls, the Haulover, right at Coscata Pond, and between First and Second Bend. Those are the areas that are already washing over or experiencing more accelerated erosion. And so we have a kind of a draft plan from our consultants on their analysis. They did some really neat modeling to look at erosion rates and possible erosion scenarios at different sea level rise, given the current sand profiles of each of those spots. We asked for a little bit more input because one of the things that became very clear as we were looking at the plan is that the solution is just more sand. It's figuring out how to increase elevation at these spots to prevent washover and erosion, and thinking about the island as a whole and the need for sand in places that are more infrastructure based versus access and natural areas, figuring out ways that we can increase resiliency that doesn't include just putting on sand in spots. So we've asked for a little bit more information, a little bit more analysis of each of the locations to see if there's steps that we can take that will help us build resiliency without first trying to buy massive amounts of sand that we're going to have a hard time finding in the state of Massachusetts. So it went back to the consultants. We expect it back in the next couple of weeks. When we get it back, one of the things that we are going to do with the consultants is hold kind of a stakeholder open meeting to get input, to present some of the ideas that we're working from, and help kind of highlight some of the potential pilot projects we're going to do on the sites to increase resiliency. One of the things I will point out that our consultants brought up as we're talking about sand is that Massachusetts is the only state at least in New England right now, that's not allowing offshore dredging of sand to be used for these kinds of it's not allowed. We can't do offshore dredging within Massachusetts waters. That is one of the solutions that other states are going towards for finding sand when you can't use sand pits. There's obviously, environmental impacts to sourcing sand that way. It's certainly an issue, but it's not formidable in Massachusetts yet. And it just kind of adds to that discussion of where and how we'll get the sand that we need for some of these projects. That's all the update that I have on that one. And just a real quick update on Hither Creek, that dune restoration project that's out there. Our Dune pilot project study where we did massive plantings of dune grass out there, as well as some woody shrubs back in the spring. And this is the washover where the stilt house was taken away and the salt marshes were buried. We've actually seen pretty good increases in elevation where the dune fencing was illegally placed. But the dune itself is rebuilding really well around that dune fencing and revegetating naturally. And then the vegetation that we put out is done amazingly. Just with given one growing season, we'll obviously have to see, how it responds to any future storms, but we have seen a really good creation essentially in that area. And we are seeing some of the salt marsh reestablishing itself through the sand near where the bridge is. So we're getting resiliency from both of those natural habitats out there. And it looks right now like pretty good data from a pilot project for other work, other similar work.
That's awesome to have some positive news. Thank you, Jen.
Of course.
Yeah. Matt, question? Matt, I can't tell if you froze right there. It looks like you're still muted. But we'll come back to you if you're not able to connect at the moment. Matt did send us a note saying that his internet was a little bit unstable. Vince, do you want to go ahead with some of your announcements from new business, and then we'll come back to Matt if he's available.
Sure thing, no problem. I have two things to cover that I was going to cover under new business. One that's more or less on the agenda, one that's not. The one that's on the agenda is to discuss our new our new hire here within the Natural Resources Department. Morgan Sale joined the Natural Resources Department on October 18th as the Coastal Resources Technician. Her desk is right behind me here.
Did you lose me?
We did for a minute. Vince, do you want to pause and we'll take advantage of Matt's connection?
I'll just take it really. I'll do it quick. No, just we can't assume sort of the roads in Sheep's Pond are a perfect example. We're required to, do whatever we can to put those roads back. That's easy. $80,000, you bring a truck out and it's dirt. It's going to be very difficult when it starts to be, tar and underground utilities and everything else. And so we have to assume that eventually the state is going to change their rules on roads, change their rules on sand, and look at this differently as we all adapt with this. So I think people have to be careful not to give up and say that's never possible, because we're going to need a lot of sand and it's going to need to come from somewhere. I don't think there's any.
All right, we're losing Matt again.
Sort of magical way of, doing this naturally without a lot of sand.
Yeah, all right, thank you, Matt. One of the things that the Arcadis Arcadis report just barely hinted at was some of these laws might need to change, and we might need to ask for them to change. And so that the CRP doesn't directly say that we should get involved in state and federal politics, but that may be what needs to happen, similar to the way that the housing advocates are working, through the state. So that's something to keep in mind. I'm not making any recommendations or predictions, but I think Matt has a point that the law may not be the way it is forever. Jen, and then Ian.
Thank you, Mary. That's a really good point. And I just want to say real quick that my point was not that we will never be able to get sand in those ways, but that currently it isn't allowed. So that is a stumbling block at the moment for that particular methodology, and a consideration for how much we're going to have to spend and how we prioritize what we're doing and ask for it. I will say one of the things that's important about doing particular pilot projects and putting plans together in which we ask for certain things is that the more groups that ask for it and ask for it in an intelligent way, the more likely that those particular projects might be considered favorably within the state for permitting. And this is particularly from a natural resources side of things. There's even certain kinds of restoration work that we would like to do that might be difficult to get permitted, but doing it as smaller pilot projects or doing it in partnership with reputable organizations that have done similar kinds of projects becomes more likely that we might get permitted through the state. The Oyster Reef project that NCF is putting in, hopefully out in Pulpus Harbor, hasn't been done in Massachusetts before, but we're looking at getting it permitted finally this week, and it will be something that could potentially be a resiliency option used elsewhere. So it's stuff like that where we just keep asking when we know it's a decent project until we get the right permissions.
Thank you, Jen. And Ian?
Yes, thank you, Mary. I can't help but smile when Jen is talking about the subsidized housing for oysters out there. So I would say that the sooner we push for these sort of changes, the better. And I don't know if it should be addressed in the letter or whether there won't be enough room in it. But I think that is the way that as an island, we need to get to exert as much political pressure as possible, as part of the front line of our defenses. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. I really love the affordable housing for oysters comment. Okay, so where were we? So back to Vince, I think is where we are.
I'll try and be quick and brief. So Morgan Sale joined the Natural Resources Department October 18th. She's our new Coastal Resources Technician. Morgan previously worked with the Trustees Reservations and filled roles there, including she was the shorebird technician, she was the gatehouse manager, and she did ranger work. Morgan had an interesting start with NRD and hit the ground running with the storm last week. And she was also out checking CONCOM filings and compliance issues across the island. She is also been out checking even for seed scallops. She has had a hell of a 2 weeks in her new job. And big welcome to Morgan. I wish she was here today. Unfortunately, she had to be off island for the day. She's taken over part of the role of my old job, which was the shorebird work. So I'm pretty much going to lose that entirely, that I had to do through the last couple of years in the pandemic as well. The one other announcement that I'd like to go through quickly is for this coming Saturday, November 6th, NBI, Nantucket Biodiversity Initiative. I'm a member, other people on this call are also members. They're having a climate change and biodiversity workshop. It's from 9:30 to 11:30 at the Thomas Macy Warehouse. You do need to register, as I understand it. Speakers include myself. I will be giving a brief presentation on an overview of the CRP as it pertains to climate change and biodiversity. And other speakers include Sarah Boyce, Emily Molden, or RJ Turcott. I think it might be RJ. Dr. Jen Carberg will also be speaking. Karen Beattie will have a section, and Rachel Freeman will also have time on the agenda as well. think that covers everything I wanted to cover, unless you wanted me to. Oh, Mary, did you ask me to go over a quick amount of the storm last week as well?
Oh, yes,
if you wish?
please, Vince.
So we all know we had a terrific storm event. Morgan has been out checking sites and relaying information back here to both myself and Jeff Carlson, Director of Natural Resources Department. We had some pretty interesting flooding events. No terrifically major impacts. The area down at Jetty's Beach, the car park, essentially filled up with water. There was wash over from Nantucket Sound caused by wave action. The car park was about still half full yesterday, but it had gone down just a little bit so you could access the large upper car park behind the Sandbar restaurant. There was also some substantial flooding and at Easy Street over time. A few boats broke their moorings. We didn't end up having any major scallop strandings, which was terrific. And we lost a few trees, but everybody saw that in the newspaper, I'm sure. There was one tree on Centre Street that pretty much collapsed. In terms of the coastal zone, we saw some impacts to the North Shore more than we did to the South Shore. The day before the storm, there was a bit of a rip current, a rip tide that caused some pretty severe erosion, most notably around the wastewater treatment plant, Surfside. Then as the wind shifted and started to come out of the north and northeast, we lost most of the wave impacts to the South Shore, and we actually saw a tiny bit of accretion in a few places. It was well noted last night that there's been some impact on the East Shore, particularly to partly to the geotubes, but more to the different or somewhat related structure just to the south, that's jute sacking, that suffered quite badly in this storm. Morgan has been out checking those sites either daily or every other day since she arrived, which is now part of her work. She'll be able to hopefully attend some crack meetings in the future and provide observations from her time on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Vince. All right, so let's go back. We had skipped a discussion of upcoming meeting dates and topics. So this is November 2nd. This was not a scheduled meeting day. November 9th, the second Tuesday, would have been our regular meeting. We had talked to the Nantucket Yacht Club. They had a meeting that Vince attended. They asked him for information about the Coastal Resilience Plan, and we had invited them to come and share their concerns with the committee, and that was scheduled for November 9th. So we have the potential to meet on our regular meeting on the 9th. I would try and have a letter drafted for the Coastal Resilience Plan for review on the 9th as well, so that we can move forward on that. Then the 16th, we would not normally meet, but the 23rd would be 2 days before Thanksgiving. And so there would be the option to meet on the 9th and 16th in November and skip the 23rd if the committee so wishes. That would also have the benefit, hopefully, of moving forward with the letter that can go to the Coastal Resilience Plan so that that can keep moving. So that's my suggestion to the committee. Hopefully that will fit with people's schedules, but I definitely want to check with all of you first. If we meet on the 9th and the 16th and not on the 23rd or the 30th, does that work for people? Or are there other things going on? Ian?
So I'm actually going to be in London for the week of the 15th through the 19th. So I could, and I probably at 10 in the morning, that would be 3 in the afternoon on Tuesday. And I have a business appointment. So I wouldn't, my small contribution wouldn't be included, I'm afraid.
Other comments on availability for the 9th or the 16th, Sarah?
I'm personally available. I'm just wondering if we need to meet on the 9th and the 16th if we've met today, or do we have enough to just be one meeting in November?
Potentially, we could meet on the 9th. That's sort of assuming that the letter that's going to go to the Coastal Resilience Plan can be reviewed, edited, and adopted all in one meeting. Not out of the question, not the easiest thing to do sometimes, but we can shoot for that. Or we can do substantial approval and send a final for email. So that is an option to only meet on the 9th.
Just for the record, I'm available both days, so it doesn't matter.
Comments from any other committee members? So it sounds like what Vince and I need to do is prepare the agenda for the 9th, schedule that meeting. And if we discover on the 9th that we need to meet on the 16th, then we will probably go ahead and do so. But we do have options of the 23rd and the 30th are also Tuesdays in November. I kind of like the idea of taking a break at this point for a few weeks over the Thanksgiving and stroll holiday. But I want to make sure that we're not holding anything up with the Coast Roseanne's plan. Vince, we're tentatively scheduled for the select board.
Tentative, that's exactly the word, tentatively scheduled for early December. I think the 1st is what's in my mind. But if we could have a letter of approval or whatever this committee decides to do for them, great. If we have to push it later, that is what it is. I am not going to get overly excited once this keeps moving forward, I guess.
Okay, so the plan is definite on the 9th. No one has a schedule conflict for that. And we'll talk about the rest of the dates afterward. The town also had a discussion at the last select board meeting about the potential of returning to in-person meetings. It's in the agenda, but the long and short of it is not this year. We will continue to meet virtually through the beginning of January at the very earliest, and probably for some time after that. Any comments or questions on scheduling? No. So we do have minutes from September 14th. Vince, if you want to put those up. And thank you to Peter for filling in for Fritz on the 14th as well as for today. Vince had a note that there was a link to the Fuss and O'Neill report that was discussed on the 14th that we could add to the minutes. So let's go ahead and do that when we have the opportunity. Other comments or questions on the minutes from the 14th? If there are, Vince?
Thank you, Mary. So normally I put this is kind of a little bit redundant. Normally I put the links towards the top for information that was presented. I think for this one, it might be best suited to go towards the end where the link for the recording is. So if nobody objects to that. I have to find the right place, I beg your pardon. I think the link for the recording was here, yeah.
Okay, well, whatever works. I don't think it matters really where we put the link, as long as it's obvious to people what the link is for. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Jen. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, by roll call vote, Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Peter Brace,
Aye.
Matt Fee, if you're available. Don't know if Matt's still with us. Ian?
I abstain, Mary, as I wasn't present.
Thank you, Ian. Jen Carberg?
Aye.
And Mary Longacre, aye. I'm not going to try and count that, who did what on that. And then we also have minutes from October 12th.
If I may, Mary, just two quick observations. There was one time correction and there was one typo, and that's it.
Great. Any further comments or corrections for the minutes of the October 12th meeting?
I'll move for approval.
Thank you, Gary. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Peter. Roll call vote, Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Peter Brace,
Aye.
Ian Golding,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Abstain.
and Mary Longacre, aye. Thank you. Okay, so back to the new business and reports. Are there any other committee members available for reports at this time? We covered all of Vince's points. I don't see anything there. That is the end of our agenda. We will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Ian. There is a second.
Second.
Thank you, Gary. Roll call vote, Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Peter Brace,
Aye.
Ian Golding,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Mary Longacre, aye. We'll see you all next Tuesday, the 9th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Vince. Goodbye, everybody.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.
Did you want to stop the recording?
Yes.